Recording in progress.
All right, we're recording. This is Minute Message with Micah. And before we start, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this time. Let your word not return unto you void, but accomplish that which you please. Amen. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So we got a message here. And I call this one The Body, a biblical view into anthropology and how to deal with the body after the cessation of life. And this is a special request video by Mr. Burns from back in 2015. This is long overdue. So with that, let's get into it. Okay. Everybody has a body, a physical body. Our body is our physical being. It is the materialistic manifestation of who we are. We are all born from our mother, naked and helpless. And no man is exempt from the senses felt while in the body. Pain, pleasure, sensitivity to sources of light and sound, hunger, thirst, and fatigue. No one's immune to that. No one's exempt from those feelings. Our body also is a vessel to translate emotion felt from within, such as laughter, joy, anger, jealousy, and love. It's an amazing thing our body is. Our body from the inside out is a living organism with its structure or frame consisting of bones held together by fibrous connective tissue called ligaments. Muscles connect to the bones by tendons that give our body the source of strength for our movements. Ever so precisely woven and fitted within our frame is a masterpiece design of work. The plumbing and electrical, if you will, consisting of veins, arteries, nerves, major components we know as vital organs that each serve its own special function within our body that contributes to the overall goal of harmoniously making the body function. All this handiwork is covered in a flesh of skin and hair. Our body truly is a wonder with all its intricate complexities. It's very poetic. I wrote that myself, but I think it does a good job explaining and describing our physical body. Yes. All right, so basically, how to deal with a dead body, a loved one. All right, so to tackle this from a biblical view, we got to go back to the beginning. Genesis is always a great place to start for many, many subjects because there's so much in Genesis, so much foundation in Genesis that builds upon many other subjects. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 28. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Pretty straightforward right there. So God made man. And we get to chapter 2. It kind of rehashes what was said in Genesis 1, just with a little more detail. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground. There's one point. And breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. There's a second point. And man became a living soul. There's a third point right there. So from the dust of the ground, the dirt, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So there's a soul within our body. The Bible tells us this. Where is my mouse? Let me move my picture here right there for this slide. So basically, like I said, right, we have a very intricate body right here from the dust of the ground. So we start with the bones, and within the bones, we've got our veins and arteries, our major components, if you will, our organs, the heart that pumps blood. And the Bible tells us that the blood is in the life. The life is in the blood thereof. The Bible tells us this. So we got the bone, then the veins, the muscles, and then it's covered by skin. And so God formed all this. He made this from the dust and dirt of the ground. And then man became a living soul. So ultimately, you and I, we're just dirt. We are dirt. You can take that, and that works on so many levels. It works on a physical level because it's scientifically based, and it works on an emotional level, a theologic level, a philosophic level. We're dirt. You and I are dirt. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So the dirt, still focusing on the dirt here, and the body, it truly is like just in the hand alone, the precision that our fingers have. It's amazing. It's amazing. It truly is. And so I put this together here, and I'll just a little side note. This last summer, I took a good interest in my backyard and digging in the dirt and planting plants and gardening, some backyard gardening. And you learn a lot about dirt and dirt composition because not everything requires the same amount of dirt, right? Or I should say the same kind of dirt. So soil is composed of sand, silt, and clay. Now, different ratios is going to give you different consistencies, right? Like some plants aren't going to grow well in clay, which we've got a lot of clay here in North Texas. I'll say that. A lot of clay soil. Whereas if you live more towards the coast, you're going to have more sandy soil, right? But our bodies are made from the dust of the ground. Genesis says this and repeats it. It's interesting that scientists have discovered that the 59 elements found in the human body are all found in Earth's crust. And so, like within the dirt itself, nitrogen, iron, copper, magnesium, calcium, oxygen, silicon, sodium, water, phosphorus, potassium, all that is in our bodies. And it's no wonder because that's what we're made from. We're made from the dust of the earth. And the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK, those are your three macronutrients found in the dirt. And then you got all the little stuff like zinc and magnesium, copper. Yeah. So, and soil has a pH level, just like our bodies have a pH level. You know, if you're healthy, you're more alkaline, and if you're sick, you're acidic. The more acidic your body is with the food you eat, if you eat real, not so much acidic foods, but if you eat foods that's not really natural, high in all these minerals, your body is going to be more acidic and you get sick. And just like soil, right? There's alkaline soils and there's acidic soil. So man made from the dust of the ground. That's what we are. We are dust. We're dirt. And the breath of life. The Bible tells us that we have the breath of God in us, and that is the mechanism that makes us a living soul. I like these pictures here. They're helpful. They're not absolute because we don't know what the breath of life looks like, but we know that it's God that gives us our life. And the term soul and spirit is a matter of theological debate. For simplicity, we'll just use those terms interchangeably. And I coined that from a very well-learned man, Mr. Billy Graham. Billy Graham said that in one of his sermons. And I'm going to just give him the credit for that, because even amongst well-learned Bible scholars and theologians, the term soul and spirit is still a matter of debate. But that's who we are, our soul, our spirit. That's who we are. This body is just a vessel. And so we got man. Let me move myself over here. Put myself right here for this. Man is God's crowning creation from his 6 days of work. And take a note. Let me move myself up here. It was never for man to die. Never. When God made Adam, Adam would have lived forever in perfect harmony and communication with God face to face on this earth. It was never for man to die. But here we are. We cannot not deal with death and dying. Like we cannot. We have to deal with it. Right? How do we deal with it? We'll get there. Okay, so fast forwarding a little bit. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. So right there, God prophesied, if you will, to Adam, if you eat of this fruit from this tree, you will surely die. And when the woman, fast forwarding a little more, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. So God says, if you eat of this fruit, you will surely die. In Genesis 3:6, we find out Adam did eat. So now what? So let me see, because no, this is not correct. I have made an error here. This is Genesis 3. This is Genesis 3. Might have to stop this here. This is killing me. Genesis 3, verse 17, 18, and 19. Bear with me here. I'm going to fix this. I'm a little embarrassed here. If I can. Oh, come on. Nope, I guess not. Okay. Genesis 3, verse 18, 19, 17, 18, 19. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat of the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it thou was taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. So God says, like, if you eat of this, you're going to die. He ate, and God says, this is your curse. The ground is cursed for your sake, and you'll eat from the ground all the days of your life till you return to the ground, because dust you are. And notice that the Bible never says anything about ashes. So traditionally in America, you go to a funeral and the eulogy, they say ashes to ashes, dust to dust, return to the ground we must. The Bible never says anything about ashes. Just a side note. Okay, so fast forwarding to Genesis 5, verse 5. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Adam died. He's dead. He is dead. And The Bible tells us, as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. So we'll focus on the first part of this verse here. Men, it is appointed unto men once to die, right? So the questions become how and where to put the body, right? How and where to put the body. We have Adam, the village elder. He's a lifeless body. What do we do? He flatlined, you know. This is in a typical EKG reading right here, you know, an electrocardiogram, echocardiogram. It measures the heart, the electrical pulses from the heart. And when you flatline, it means your heart's not beating. If your heart's not beating, it's not pumping blood, which carries oxygen to all your vital organs. You flatline, you're dead. Adam died. Now we have a body. So when Adam died, presumably Eve, his wife, and Seth had to deal with Adam's body. I'm sure there was more involved, but the Bible doesn't really tell us this. They had to deal with Adam's body. I'll also accept the words carcass, corpse, or cadaver. Yes, funny yes. Those are words. Adam could have just been a corpse when they found him. He could have been a cadaver. Could have been a there's a carcass, right? Of course, that's just me being funny. But Adam's dead. We don't know how Adam died. It's not too important other than the fact that he did die. As the Lord said, from dust we were created and dust we shall return. Our bodies are organic, carbon-based. So when you look up the word organic, it's carbon-based, right? We are carbon-based creatures. So even if Adam's body was laid out on top of the ground, we know by millennia, thousands of years of observation, that his body would have broke down back into the ground. Only our bones would remain. And fun fact, bones and hair don't break down. Hair eventually, over a long period of time, will break down, but hair is formed from a protein keratin that our fingernails are made out of. So hair, it's resistant to breaking down, but we know for a fact bones do not break down. And if you have any questions about that, take your Thanksgiving turkey after it's all been picked apart, or as soon as y'all are done with it, throw it out in the field. Come back in the spring. The bones will be there. Also, it's Adam. So you got to think about this. It's Adam, right? He is, without a doubt, the captain of the ship, the head of the house, the village elder, the leader of the pack. Like, it was Adam. He was the first. Surely there was a ceremony of some sort. When they all realized Adam's dead, I'm sure from a human standpoint, they had some sort of ceremony. Now, was there any kind of traditions or rituals that they had at that time? I mean, nothing set in stone, right? But I'm sure that they gathered together and laid his body somewhere and remembered Adam, right? Of some sort. Now, at this point in time, as far as we know, the Bible doesn't tell us about the rules, if you will, on how to deal with the dead. Numbers 19 gives us insight on that, and we'll get there. But for now, we don't know how specifically they dealt with Adam's body. But we can make educated guesses, right? We can ponder the idea. Some simple and primitive ways Adam's body could have been dealt with. Set on top of the ground under a tree or somewhere Adam liked to be in remembrance of Adam, right? It's like, oh, Tommy liked to go fishing. So we'll, bury him close to the lake where he liked to fish all the time. Right. So something of that effect, right? Just lay it on top of the ground. As simple as it gets. And then eventually Adam's body would have broke down. Right. They could have just placed his body and stacked rocks on top of his body. They could have, right? Like we see here. That's a simple thing. And then, during that time, anybody walking by would always, hey, there's Adam's mound right there. A pillar, if you will. I'd call that a pillar. Whatever you want to call it, right? A monument, right? Something simple. A hole dug where his body could have been physically buried, thus fulfilling to a higher degree what the Lord said, returning to the dust of the earth. There we go. And in this picture right here, this very well could have been in Adam's time. And it's like, but Micah, shovels? They didn't have shovels back then. Oh, did they? Did they? This shouldn't be called into question because the Bible tells us that people had harps and organs, musical instruments, and the Bible says, and Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, right? And that's Genesis 4:22. You can read a few verses before and thereafter, but there was some ancient knowledge back then, right? Brass and iron. Does anybody know what element brass is? It's not an element, it's an alloy. It's made of copper and zinc. So it's like they had to know what copper was, they had to know what zinc was, and they had to melt. They had to get metal so hot that it melted and formed a new alloy, and a new metal. How'd they get that knowledge? Certainly, if they had brass, they had a shovel. So this is well within the realm of possibility. Well within the realm of possibility. And it's very primitive. A hole in the ground, right? So all these are possible, how they dealt with Adam's body. Adam's body could have been put in a cave, right? Real simple. Just laid in a cave. Like that's where I put him. Or they could have just floated his body down the river, as seen here. Not saying that's what they did, but it's possible. It is possible, right? It's just like, well, just float him down the river, right? Let the current take him away. That is possible. Not saying that's how they dealt with it, but they could have. It's a simple, primitive way to deal with the body, right? Got to get it out of here. I take a note, the after effects of letting a body decompose in the water, right? So if you let a body decompose in the water, you get the Ganges River. And if anybody knows about the Ganges River in India, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not exactly a river you want to go swimming in. It's a sanitary thing, but those are possible. Those are all possible. Another simple primitive way, they could have burned his body into ash. I guess cremation is the word, but just for me, when I hear the word cremation, I think of pie. I think of a cream pie. I'm sorry. I just like cream. We got cream pie, right? So I don't like the word cremation. When I think of, burning with fire, my mind goes to the word pyro, like a pyromaniac or a pyre, the root word pyro. I think of cream pie when I hear the word cremation. That's why I say burned, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're burning the body to ash. And when you have the body burned into ash, what do you typically do? It goes in an urn, right? That's very common in American culture, right? You have your loved ones ashes in an urn somewhere, like on a mantle or in a glass case, a hutch of some sort. Yep. But what is that urn? Where have we seen that before in history? Anybody? What are those? Canopic jars. And where are they from? They're from Egypt. And just a side note, just a thought, you can't return to the earth if your ashes or dust are contained in a jar. Just a thought, right? It is what it is, right? All right. So those are just some simple ways that Adam's body could have been dealt with. Not saying any are correct, not saying any are wrong. Those are just some simple ways that they could have done it. Now, some more complex ways, Complex ways Adam's body could have dealt with mummification or embalming. Now, embalming is the process of preserving the body with liquid chemicals, right? Salt water, possibly, right? I'm sure the ancient Egyptians didn't have what modern societies here in 2022 have, but the process was similar. And if you really, from a historical standpoint, you could say that the Egyptians were trailblazers into in the embalming process, right? It just preserves the body, right? So here's their canopic jars, and their canopic jars that they'd put, and see if I can go back a slide. They'd, not saying, in Anubis, they'd put the stomach in there or the liver in Horus, right? But they had these jars to their gods, right? And they'd put them in a what did the Egyptians call? I call it a coffin, right? A sarcophagus. Yes, they put their body in the sarcophagus after they'd wrap it up in linen, right? So that's how they dealt with the dead, right? Maybe Adam was embalmed. We don't know. Don't know. Another complex way Adam's body could have been dealt with. Oh yes. There's your old canopic jars right there. Now, if you did take, I don't know, a stomach or a heart or liver or lungs, and you were able to put it in a jar, what would happen over time? It would turn to a liquid goo full of bacteria, right? It would definitely be a biohazard. Definitely a breeding ground for infectious diseases. Yes. If you just put it in there, right? I'm sure they did. And then another complex way Adam's body could have been dealt with, cryogenic freezing. Don't discount it. The Bible does give credence to advanced ancient technology pre-flood era. Not saying they did, a demolition man type cryogenic freezing, but, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they took his body somewhere where it could be frozen in time, right? Like, that's possible. Not out of the realm of possibility, but that'd be a complex way to deal with a body, right? Cryogenic freezing. Something interesting to think about. Just kind of getting the gears turning in our minds, right? Yes. All right. So when we look around the world with a under the lens of time, we can see different cultures. I should say, no culture is exempt from dealing with the dead, right? No culture, regardless of your belief in God or not, they're going to have to deal with the dead, with their peers dying. And so something interesting in Malaysia, they dig up the dead in a ritual, and they keep the body preserved, and that's what they do. That's their way of dealing with it. In the Eskimos, right up there in Alaska, I didn't have any room to put them up there. They took the whale bones and built like a little monument, like a, a grave site, if you will, and put the body there, right? We got the coffin dance in Africa going on. We've already talked about in India at the Ganges River, they float the bodies down the river. In the Middle East, they take their prayer rug, put it over the coffin. I'm gonna call it a coffin. Y'all can call it a casket. I'm gonna call it a coffin. And they have a ceremony. They have a ceremony. The Celtics, they've got their grave site under the earth. Just natural, very natural. You got the cross, the Celtic cross. In America, for fallen soldiers, everyone dresses up in their Class A's. We put the flag, our nation's flag, over the coffin, and we have a very formal ceremony. Hawaii, they put the leis and the flowers out into the water. They'll scatter the ashes into the water. And in them Spanish-speaking countries, they celebrate El Dia de la Muerto, right? The Day of the Dead, where they dress up like they do. They put on their traditional attire, and they celebrate the loss or the death of their loved ones, right? Like grandma and grandpa, and they let the children know that death is part of life. And it is. Death is part of life, right? So every culture has their own unique way of dealing with the dead, but no one's immune from dealing with it, right? Not saying any's right and any's wrong, but this is what they do. They got to deal with the dead. So let's get to the biblical foundation of dealing with the dead, right? What did God's people do in dealing with the dead? So when we look at Abraham, we're all familiar with Abraham, right? Chapter 22, he was called to sacrifice Isaac, but in Genesis 23:19, the Bible lets us know that Sarah was buried in a cave in a field in I forget the land. I'm very limited on space on every individual slide, right? As much as I'd like to put the whole verse there and give a whole sermon, if you will, on where Sarah died, in a cave in a field. And I think she was 125 years old when she died. And Abraham was 175 years old when he died. But it was this cave in this land that Abraham bought. And then, Abraham's son Isaac, this little boy here grew up and he married Rebecca. And so Rebecca, we find out in Genesis 49:31 that both of them were buried with Abraham and Sarah in the same cave in the field, right? And so, well, who buried Isaac? Isaac's son Jacob. Jacob buried Isaac in that cave, right? And then Jacob's wife, or later renamed Israel, right? She died giving birth to Benjamin, and her final resting place that we find out in Genesis 35:16-20 was, she died they were traveling somewhere, gave birth and died, and he set a pillar over her grave. Bible doesn't say specifically, what the pillar was, but I imagine it was of just unhewn stone, right? Like God told Abraham, if you make a an altar, if you make an altar, use unhewn stone, right? Just stack rocks up, natural stack rocks. Don't sit there and get it all nice and straight and pretty. Just stack the rocks. So I imagine that's something that Rachel was, you know, finally laid to rest right there. So all natural ways in the Bible, God's people, all, you know, buried or dealt with in natural ways, right? And so when we fast forward, we get, out of Egypt and into where they're almost at the promised land and God's laying out the rules, building them up, setting them up. Numbers 19, verse 11 tells us, he that toucheth a dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days. And that's interesting because dead bodies are dirty, right? As soon as a body dies, it starts decomposing right there. And then verse 16, and whosoever toucheth one that is slain with a sword in the open fields, or a dead body, or a bone of a man, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. So there's a sanitary cleanliness aspect that goes with dealing with a dead body. And I'll spare you all that. He shall purify himself and wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean at even, or in the evening. It shall be a perpetual statute unto them. So if you deal with a dead body, God's telling you, hey, make sure you wash and bathe and wash your clothes and stay clean, right? There was a cleanliness, like, because God knows, hey, bodies die, they decompose, they become breeding grounds for bacteria, right? So something to keep in mind. And then something interesting, something in the Bible, Samuel. I recently kind of was reading Samuel, talking about Saul. Saul died fighting the Philistines, sort of. It's a matter of debate. But Saul died on the battlefield. That's a fair statement. Saul died on the battlefield. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons falling in Mount Gilboa. And they, the Philistines, they took Saul's body and they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent it into the land of the Philistines round about, to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth. And Ashtaroth was the god of the Philistines. That and Dagon, right? And they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. So think about this. You got these uncircumcised people. They see the king of their enemy dead. So they took his body, they cut off his head and take his armor, and they send it round about to, they took his breastplate and probably sent it over here, his sword and helmet and sent it over there, his boots, sent it over there. So they paraded his body around, basically, right? Like it was something to celebrate. Very little respect for the dead. Very little respect for the dead. And then they take his body, probably naked, a decapitated body, and they mounted it to the wall. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that of which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So that's an interesting story. Very interesting, because there's a lot we can pick up from that. So you got these, the enemies of God, and they no respect for the dead, right? They'll take a dead body, cut the head off, parade the armor and the effects everywhere, and they'll take dead bodies with their heads cut off, stinking and decaying, mount them to the wall. But then you got these men of Jabesh Gilead, valiant men, men of courage, men of honor. They went all night and they took the body of Saul and his sons, and they came into Jabesh and they burnt. So they took these dead bodies, like they had, if you think about it, like they had to get Saul's body off the wall, right? They had to physically touch this body, this dead body, probably stinking and decaying, and his 3 sons. So there's 4 dead bodies they had to deal with. So they got out of the land of the Philistines and they burned the bodies. They burned the bodies. And then once the bodies were burned, they took the bones. So they had to scatter the ash away, grab up the bones, and they took these bones and buried them under a tree. Cremation is it? They burned them, right? As we properly coined the term cremation. So cremation, right? So Israel's first king was cremated, you could say, right? You can make that argument. And then when it says that the men fasted 7 days, you could tell that their intentions were righteous, right? Because people just don't go 7 days without eating for no reason, right? These valiant men, they fasted because it was the death of their king. So the Bible does have an account of cremation, and it's the account of Israel's first king being cremated. Very interesting. All right, so fast forwarding to John 11. This is a great, great story. This really sets us up. This is, and the red letters are the words of Jesus. Just kind of summarizing this chapter here. Now, a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary, and her sister Martha. These things said he, and after that he said unto them. So Jesus says, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of his sleep. And then Jesus' disciples say, like, Lord, if he's asleep, then he should do well and he'll wake up and be just fine. Why do you need to wake him up? Right? Jesus' disciples did not understand that when Jesus said Lazarus is asleep, he's dead. Right? They didn't know that he was dead. So Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And so skipping down some verses, Jesus said unto her, thy brother shall rise again. And then Martha, he said that to Martha, your brother will rise again. And Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So if you stop right there, kind of getting sidetracked just a little, but staying on course, I find it interesting that Martha knew, like before Jesus came, that there will be a resurrection. It's like the people knew at the last day there will be a resurrection. And Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? And Jesus tells Martha, if you believe in me, you will never die. Do you believe this? And then Mary was come where Jesus was, and saw him, and fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. So Mary was sad that her brother Lazarus was dead, and she's telling Jesus, if you were here a few days earlier, he wouldn't have died. And the next verse, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And that's key right there. This is Jesus. Jesus. He groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Even Jesus, yes, he's God, but he was also a man. And like I said at the beginning, no man is exempt from emotion and feeling and hunger and thirst, right? Jesus got hungry. Jesus got thirsty. Jesus felt everything man feels while in the body. And when he saw Mary weeping and all the people weeping over the death of Lazarus, because when someone dies, people get sad. That's not always the case, but assuming you got a good man that loves people, he's a loved one. When death, like a gypsy, takes your life, people are going to be sad. And Jesus felt the sorrow that everyone had for Lazarus, and he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And there's an aspect of death that we all deal with when presented with it. The universal pain of losing a loved one. And pop culture has done well to express this in such emotion. You know, if I die young, bury me in satin, lay me down in a bed of roses, sink me in the river at dawn, send me away with the words of a love song, the sharp knife of a short life. And if you dwell on that, like especially that song right there, I'm sure y'all know what song I'm talking about. It stirs up emotion. It does. The sharp knife of a short life. Lazarus died young. He was not an old man. And there was pain and people were sad. And then, you know, we get another song. And I wish grandpas never died. I wish grandpas never died. When you're a kid, like when traditionally do grandpas die? When you're a kid, right? And traditionally, if you got a good grandpa, you know, he's going to be someone special and meaningful to you. But then grandpas, they die. And it it life teaches you quick about death, right? When you're a little boy. It hurts, it's sad, especially for a little child. Boys and girls alike, losing grandpa. And it's not just, you know, for a select few, everybody. Bone, the group Bone back in 1997, you know, the Crossroads, you know, Easy sees Uncle Charlie. Now Easy's long gone. Really wish he would come home. Really wish he would come home. Sometimes your friends ain't coming home. Can somebody, anybody tell me why? Hey, can somebody, anybody tell me why we die? We die. I don't want to die. I mean, they sing it more poetically and melodic than I do with my monotone voice. It's it's a very emotional song. It is. But just to touch on that, can anybody tell me why we die? Sin. Bone clearly didn't have an understanding of the Bible. It's because of sin why we die. It's sin. Death was never part of God's plan. You think all this pain in the world was part of God's plan? No, it wasn't. This The death of loved ones and the pain you feel truly is the work of the devil. You can quote me on that. You can quote me on that. And then something kind of meaningful to me, and I like this song by MCR. It's called "The Ghost of You." It's meaningful. Trying to keep it together here. Trying to keep it together here, but it's a very emotional song, very poetic, and they did a good job putting this together here. At the end of the world, or the last thing I see, you are never coming home. Never coming home. Sometimes you don't come home. It hurts. And nobody is exempt from that. Nobody. If you got a loved one that doesn't come home on the way home, or goes off to school and doesn't come home from that day of school, that pain, that sorrow, that sadness, that anger, no one's exempt from it. No one. Song here. Y'all can listen to it on your own if you want, but I feel they did a good job expressing that feeling right there. And then that pain, like this picture sums it up right there. So within our humanity, death unites us all. And here we are trying to kill each other over trivial matters, but we're all human. And the one thing that we all have in common, regardless of our skin color, what we believe, where we live, how much money we have, our status, one thing that we all have in common that we can all rally behind is death unites us all. No one makes it out of here alive. You can quote me on that. Just as we all have our physical bodies, we all die. Your wealth, your riches, your status in this world matter not when your time is up. Like billionaires, people, trillionaires, and there are trillionaires out there. When that time comes, your money does not make you exempt from what everyone else deals with. And a righteous understanding of death will put your current priorities into perspective. Death comes for us all, and sadly, it takes those who are closest to us. More times than not, way too early. That's why time and death are synonymous. As we go about our day, living our life, we don't think much about dying. Death is a thief and a murderer. Death takes from us that which our wealth and our status cannot replace. We are human in our humanity. We feel pain both physically and emotionally, and death hurts our feelings in such a manner that stirs up deep within ourselves the harsh reminder of our mortality, because we're all human. We're all going to go back to the dirt one day. Loss and grief are the side effects of coming to terms with realizing the reality that someone close, a loved one, isn't coming back or isn't coming home. This was never God's design for us as man. And the Bible tells us that death is the enemy and will be cast into the lake of fire. That's 1 Corinthians 15:26. Believing in this does not take away the pain of losing a loved one, but it can take the edge off a knife of loss and grief. And it is comforting to know that one day we won't have to worry about death and dying for those that know the Lord. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. And I really appreciate the Bible using that word shall, because me going back to my days in the oil field with rigging, if anybody has any kind of background in rigging up and lifting equipment, OSHA has specific wording for, what straps and rigging and how you should do it. And it says there's a test question. There's a word should and the word shall. And like should is like, well, you should, do this kind of strap or should have this kind of rigging. But when it uses the word shall, that's an absolute. Like you shall do this type of lift with this rigging. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. That's an absolute. Death will be destroyed. You can quote me on that. And then coming back, Jesus was a man, right? Jesus was a man. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews, over his cross, over his execution. Jesus was executed. Yes, he was, by the state. Jesus, when he had cried aloud with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. That's just a very proper way of saying Jesus died. Cause of death, Roman crucifixion. Final resting place, a sepulcher purchased by Joseph of Arimathea. And the scripture for this is Matthew 27, verse 57 through 61. Jesus died. The breath of life from God left his body. Your soul, your spirit moves on, but your physical body remains. And even Jesus left behind a body for his loved ones to deal with. Yes, he did. There's Mary, John, I think. And there's Jesus. Like, he's dead. Jesus is dead. So you got this man carpenter, this body of a man, left behind, like he's dead. We have to even Jesus's family had to deal with his body. Well, how do we deal with it? Matthew 27, 57 through 62. When evening was come, there was a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. He went to Pilate, the Roman governor, and begged the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. And this is just me. Y'all can take it how you want, but I do appreciate the Bible telling us there came a rich man of Arimathea. And so it says he went to Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. I just imagine that conversation saying, hello, Pilate, my name's Joseph of Arimathea, as he, shakes his hand and puts some coinage or money in his hand. It's like, I'm concerned about the body of this Jesus character. I would appreciate if you would let me have his body to lay it to rest, to, prevent any more uprisings, as he just handed money to Pilate. Not saying that happened, not saying it's a bad thing, but I just imagine that's how it happened. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. When Joseph had taken the body, so there's Joseph of Arimathea physically handling the body of Jesus, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. So someone had to grab this arm of Jesus, this dead body, and wrap, like I'm sure he picked it up and wrapped it up and laid it in his own new tomb, a cave, which he had hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. And there was Mary Magdalene and the other, there's Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting over against the sepulchre. I'm sure they were sad. Like They didn't want to, you don't want to leave the body, right? Because the body represents who you are, right? Like, because we're earthly, we're earthly, we're earthy, right? We're natural, we are natural, and so the body represents who that spirit is and was, right? And so all we have is this body, and you want to be close to that person. So they're not leaving the body of Jesus. Now, bringing it home, it's like, but Micah, that was 2,000 years ago. We're going to bring it home. Grandpa, Pappy, Papa, Gramps isn't coming home. That's bringing it home. They're not coming home. Typically, Grandpa breathes his last at the hospital, and they're equipped to deal with such events. Typically, the body's taken to a funeral home, and given the circumstances, an open or a closed casket, wishes of the family, the body's embalmed with or without chemicals. Money always plays a part. And funeral directors work with morticians to honor the family's wishes. Thus, the body is made ready for final viewing. Right? Death is very profitable. Make no mistake about it. Like, death has become a revenue generating industry, and everyone's a customer. I'm sure y'all can put some sound with this slide together right here. All right, so typically in America, I'm gonna put myself right here for this. This is what a typical American funeral looks like. Where are we here? A casket, a coffin, that costs money. That's not free. The cremation or the burning of the body, that's not free. If you want a mausoleum, a sepulcher, a tomb, however you want to call it, that's money, especially on a plot of land like that. That's some big money right there. The urn isn't free. Burying them 6 feet under, that's going to cost money. And a tombstone, it's a headstone. It's a tombstone. I'm your Huckleberry. That don't cost that. That's not free. It costs money. And so with the death of a body, right? Maybe it's not always cut and dry. Maybe it's not always grandpa who died of old age at the hospital, right? Maybe there's some foul play. Maybe there's an accident. So in society, we have a coroner or a medical examiner, and like that's some real work right there. They pronounce death and determine what time the death occurred. There is a scene investigation. They take custody of the body. Like, so, again, more people got to handle the body. They make positive identification of the deceased. Dental records do help. They identify, and then they got to notify the next of kin, right? They got to notify the family that this person is in fact dead. The discovery of remains. Sometimes there's a crime scene, and they got some bones that they got to piece together. Issue out official death certificates, because sometimes you need a death certificate in life. Like, my father died, I need a death certificate, right? And they fill out reports, usually for legal purposes. And then we have morticians or embalmers or undertakers, whatever you want to call them. And so in preparing this video, I had to educate myself, because people typically ain't taught about, morticians and the death industry. They're responsible for preparing bodies for burial or burning, cremation, following the death. This often involves draining of the blood and other bodily fluids from the body, embalming it with chemicals to slow down the decay of the body and restoring it to a presentable state. And something I didn't know, sewing of the mouth closed as seen above, right? I'll touch on that a little more. And then funeral directors, they coordinate final arrangements with the family to deal with the dead, right? So the body's still got to be dealt with. So something about these morticians, not endorsing any channel here, but lots of good information. A YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician, right? This video right here, it's got 1 million views. It's got some great information, easy to follow, great information. And then what happens to a body during embalming, right? Very good information, quick and easy video. And this woman, who's a mortician, also talks about aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis. And I didn't even know this was a thing. They take the body, they stuff it in this tube, if you will, this pressurized vessel. They apply heat, pressure, water, and lye, and it breaks down the body, and the end result is an ashy powder that the family can put in an urn and a liquid slurry that goes down the drain. It's a way to deal with the body, right? Very interesting stuff. Very interesting. All right. So the question of what is kind of getting back to the original topic. Well, we've stayed on topic. What is the biblical response to deal with the body of the dead? Is burning the body pagan or barbaric? Is embalming the body pagan like the Egyptians? And so with the biblical understanding of life, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 42 through 44. So also is the resurrection of the dead. The resurrection. It is sown in corruption, talking about the body. The body is sown in corruption. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. We're gonna get a new body. So the Bible lets us know that this body is corruption, it's dishonor, it's weakness, it's natural. And those four: corruption, dishonor, weakness, natural. That's what this body is. It's gonna break down, it's gonna decay. How you finish it off to deal with it really doesn't matter, because the corruption is going to be incorruption. The dishonor will be glory. The weakness will be power. The natural will be spiritual. But aside from that, death. Death steals from us what we want. Death steals from us, and death steals from us. And we want to see our family one last time. Like I said earlier, death more times than not steals, and it takes it too early. Sometimes you don't get to say goodbye. You don't get a proper goodbye to your wife, to your husband, to your children, to your parents. You don't get to say goodbye. You don't get that chance. And embalming gives us that chance, that one last chance to see them one last time, right? It kind of gives us that closure. And I'm not going to take that from anybody. I'm not, right? It's like dad doesn't come home on the way from work and you don't get to say goodbye. Well, embalming kind of might give you that last opportunity to see him one last time and say goodbye. But when your spirit leaves your body and loved ones have to deal with your dead body, for those who know the voice of Jesus and follow him wheresoever he goes, the question of how and where to lay the body to rest is almost a moot point when you truly believe that Jesus is the resurrection. Like when the spirit leaves the body and all you have is this lifeless body. And there's an eeriness about a lifeless body because there's a spirit missing within it. He that hath the Son hath life, and he that hath not the Son of God hath not life. Right? So if you know that your loved one has the Son, you have that comfort knowing that they have life. Like they're probably way better off than they ever were here on earth. And that's the hope we have in Jesus. That's the hope we have in the Son of God. Like it's so beautiful. The glory that is coming, so beautiful. And that song, if I die young, the ballad of a dove, the dove, it's I'll leave it at that. But there's a study of the dove in the Bible. It was at the ark. It was at Jesus' baptism, and it's a few more times throughout. But the dove represents something. I'll leave that for God's audience if they're so inclined. Because, as Carrie said, I will see you again. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Right? When we know, when we have that hope, that belief that Jesus is the resurrection, and we believe, we know that we will see you again. And this is not the end. This is not how it ends. I will see you again. But what about organ donating, right? We still have a physical body. What about being an organ donor? And this kind of goes, if any of you were so inclined to watch the Image of God presentation in its entirety, all right, everybody has specific DNA. What about being an organ donor, right? Is that biblical? Is it unbiblical? Because our body is the temple, right? Well, our body is the temple, yes, but here's something. Here's Jim Monroe, regular guy. He's a magician, a charlatan by trade, if you will, self-proclaimed. And he's got a beautiful family, a wife, little boy, little girl, and he's a performer. He has sellout crowds. He's got a good life, but you have cancer. Like, well, that's no fun, right? And so this is his testimony. I'm just summarizing it. The problem with his body was his white blood cells were making bad copies of bad cells. In an attempt to save this man from cancer, the doctors decided he needed a bone marrow transplant. He had leukemia. Doctors wanted to completely destroy his immune system and grow a new immune system, a new blood system from the ground up. And they needed someone whose DNA matched his as close as they could get it. Like I said in that other presentation, everyone's DNA is specific. No one else has your same DNA. There's people with similar DNA, but they needed someone whose DNA matched him closely. And praise the Lord, Jim Monroe believes in the blood of Jesus by almost dying of leukemia and surviving from a bone marrow donor. And so there's Jim after he survived his chemo and his bone marrow transplant. You know, he's, you know, they got recorded, you know, she saved my life. I almost died of leukemia. And there she is. Like, this woman was a bone marrow donor. She willingly elected to be a bone marrow donor. I don't fully understand what's involved with that. And he was able to receive her bone marrow, and she saved his life through the miracles of modern medicine and medical technology, and he was meeting her. So organ donating, blood donating, and I have donated much blood from my left arm, much blood. You know, that's it's a miracle, you could say. It truly is a miracle. It is. So I'm not going to take that from anyone, because had had there been no organ donating, no bone marrow transplants, no blood donation, a lot of families, especially women giving birth, they lose a lot of blood. They need blood. Like, so I can't think of any time in the Bible where there was like, oh, hey, there was a blood donor, other than Jesus's blood shed for us, right? You can consider that Jesus being a blood donor. Yes, yes. But I'm not going to take that away from anybody. I'm not going to say it's unbiblical or ungodly. It's like, this man came to know Jesus through organ donating, basically. And you can follow more on his story. It's a very beautiful story. If you go to, just type in The Cross, the Billy Graham TV special, it's like 20, going back, 20 some minutes. And if anybody knows about the band Flyleaf, Lacey Sturm, she's got a quick little testimony, and you find out a little more about Jim's story. And there's a beautiful song at the end, and you get to hear some preaching by Billy Graham, rest his soul. Highly encourage you all to check that out. But yes, like, donating organs, you can save lives. So burying the body, burning the body, dissolving the body with aquamation, keeping the ashes, scattering the ashes, it ultimately does not matter. Naturally, as people, we'll have a ceremony of some sort and remember the life of the deceased. We're going to remember their life and the goodness and the joy that that person brought unto us. But as Christians, we know the body is not who the person is. The body is just a vessel sown in corruption. We don't put our hope in this body. We put our hope and faith in Jesus, who is the resurrection. So whatever route you choose to deal with the dead, God's not going to frown upon you. And I think that's pretty much all I got to say about that. I hope you all got something out of this. I know I did. A few jokes in there at the beginning. Minute Message with Micah. I call this one The Body, a biblical view into anthropology, the study of man and their customs and cultures, and how to deal with the body after the cessation of life. And by special request by Mr. Burns. Hope this video encourages or informs, entertains someone. Hope you all got something out of this. And we'll end it right there. And we'll end this meeting for all. Thank you all, and God bless. We'll end this meeting for all.